Moment of truth. So let's see if we did our offset correctly for the crankshaft. Oh my goodness, I realized we forgot to assemble a major component of the crankshaft, and that's the crank. So let's go ahead and do that first. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're going to grab the crankshaft or the crank, and we're going to click to place it. Green check mark, we're good. And you can rotate it around a little bit. So we want it to kind of rotate that way and maybe rotate this way. And that's decent enough. We just want this to be on the edge. So we're going to use another fasten mate because this whole thing is going to revolute inside the box. I want to go from the back side of the crank and grab that bottom circle so that that mate connector is facing inward, and then grab the center of that circle here, snaps to it, go ahead, and that looks good. Okay, so sorry about that. Thought I was all done in the last video. Now it's the moment of truth. So did we assemble this correctly? Did we offset the axle bushings? Or are we going to have to do a little bit of tinkering? So not a big deal, but let's go ahead and get to the box assembly. And we are going to insert the crankshaft. So when we go over here, we're going to look for assemblies. We're going to go to crankshaft, and there we are. So we have our crankshaft subassembly, and this time we're going to use the revolute command because we do want these to spin. And I am going to use the revolute command. Again, we want to think about where we want things to stick like glue. I'm going to use the revolute command between this part right here, this inner ring, and I want that to stick like glue to the outside of this box side. So let's see what happens. All right, so we're going to grab revolute. This is not in the correct orientation whatsoever, so it may not like it. Okay, hover over so that blue connector is facing the direction I want it to face. And then we're going to hover over on this hole right here. Whoops. Click. And we've got a revolute. Now notice a lot of the other parts are just hanging out there off to the side. And not to be concerned, goodness, not to be concerned. Going to click solve, and everything pops into place. And we were so close, but not quite. So we got about halfway. I'm going to go ahead and accept that, and let's see if we can figure out by doing a little bit of math. That looks like halfway the axle bushing. So find our axle bushing. Let's see, that was extrude 2, wasn't it? So extrude 2 is 0.375. So what's half of 0.375? Well, we can use Onshape to figure that out. So let's go back to the crankshaft. Let's go to the fasten mate. This would be fasten 2. You can tell because of where that symbol pops up. And it was the offset. I want it to be, oh, well, I'm going to get my calculator out because I need to do a little bit more. So it was 0.375 divided by 2. 0.1875. So we need to move it closer to the origin. So the further right we go is actually more negative. So if I were to go -6, that means that this axle bushing would actually hop over another inch to the right. So I actually need to take -5 plus 0.1875 to figure out what that is. So would be -4. Let's see if we can do that. -4.8 125. And solve, and that pushes it in just a little bit. Let's see what happens in our box assembly. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Look at that. So we got it. Just a little bit of math. The other thing that I notice is that this axle and that crank is kind of sticking out a little bit too far, and I'm not digging that. That doesn't seem very safe for kids. So we're going to go back to that crankshaft. We're going to edit the length of that axle. So edit in place. I'm going to change that extrusion. We're going to take off 1 inch and call it good. And go to assembly. And you'll notice that the assembly updated. Let's go back to the box assembly and see what happens. Nice. So everything is assembled. Let's see if we can rotate, and we can. So this is an important fasten, this or revolute. I'm going to rename it. So this is going to be the crank revolute. And the reason I'm going to name that is because when I go to animate everything, that's the one that I'm going to animate. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in our followers and rollers, so the follower assemblies. And we're going to use a different kind of constraint that we haven't used in a while, and that one is the slider mate. So if you hover over the slider mate, it says that it is going to allow you to translate. Translate means linear movement, so left, right, up, down on one axis. And that constrains it to the inside of this cylinder. So that's kind of what we want to have happen. We want our followers to go up and down. We don't want them to go left or right. We're going to start by inserting in an assembly of the followers, and we're going to bring it in. Now, the only thing is, in order for the profile of our follower to, and the roller to actually travel along the edges of the cam and on shape, we need to rotate this because it's not going to like it. So once we get this put in, we are going to rotate it 90 degrees. I could just type it in and be a lot quicker, 90, and call that good. So in for normal real quick so we see what we're looking at. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use a slider mate to have these followers follow along the guide. We're going to add some limits so that it doesn't travel beyond the follower guide. Okay, so let's grab that slider mate. And this time I want the mate to happen at the bottom. And there's a reason for that, because wherever this mate goes is where the 0 on our kind of calculations start. So I want to make sure that I get just that circle. I'm going to click, and then I want the slider mate to happen right at the top here, center. Okay. Again, we left our follower rod, but we're going to go ahead and hit solve, and it jumps back together, and we are good. Now here, when I did my slider mate, you'll notice that I will be able to go up or down, but I can go through the box and I can go all the way down, and that's not good. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add in some limits to our slider mate. And the maximum, so this right here, we're going to have to play around with some variables, our values, but I believe this is our maximum. And wherever this mate right here is, that's 0. So our maximum number is actually going to be 0. And let's try putting in a minimum of -1 and see what happens. So I'm going to hit solve, and if I drag this down, you can see it can go down to a certain point. I can't drag it anymore, but it can't go up beyond the bottom where that mate is. So that mate is 0. Can't go down any further than that. I think this should be about fine because most of our cams will be larger than that, but I'm going to go ahead and do -1.25 and see if that gives us a little bit more wiggle room. click solve, and yep, so that gets right about to the axle, and I'm good with that because that's what would happen in real life. Okay, so we're gonna hit OK, and now we're going to right click, and we are going to copy follower, paste follower. Ooh, that was not what I wanted it to happen. So let's delete that. And let's go to follower assembly and actually go over here and see if I can duplicate. So we'll do copy and paste follower assembly. I'm going to do that 3 more times. So the reason why I wanted to go ahead and paste this one is that I had already changed the orientation of, I've already rotated. Everything was the way that I wanted to do. So I'm going to do one more slider mate for you, and then you are on your own to go. So slider mate, we want to go at the bottom of our follower guide. And we are going to go to the top of the roller. I want it, that circle right there. Hit solve to make sure that it's good. So it found it. Now let's see if I can turn to isometric. Now we're going to do our limits. So this is the important part. Our maximum is 0. Our minimum will be negative 1.25. Okay. All right. So test it out. And it works. Okay. You go ahead and do the same thing for the other 2. And you are good to go. Okay, I've added in the constraints for the last 2 followers, and it's always a good idea to go ahead and test, because if you look, I done forgot something. I've got a couple of limits that I forgot to put in. So you can change them by double-clicking on those sliders and checking limits. Minimum would be our negative 1.25, our max is 0. Hit solve to apply, green check mark, and test it out to make sure that it's working the way that you want it to. And then we're going to do the same thing over here where we double click to edit, add in our limits, minimum negative 1.25, max is 0, hit go, and test. So that is good. Some of these you might want to consider renaming if you wanted to. That way you're not getting lost in your all the different fastens, because then if you have to go fix something, it's hard to find. But if you hover over it, it does show you by highlighting things in orange, which I find beneficial. All right, that does it for assembling. We are almost done. Now the fun part begins with our cams and getting those to move and rotate all together.